It all started when we moved to a new state for my husband's job. At first, it seemed like the perfect opportunity for us to start fresh, but little did I know, my life was about to take an unexpected turn. What seemed like a small misunderstanding with his daughter E quickly spiraled into something I couldn't have ever imagined. It tore us apart, leaving me alone, scared and confused. But what happened next? The truth was far more complicated than I could have ever guessed. This is the story of how everything changed in an instant. It all started when my husband and I, both 26, decided to make a big move. A new state, a new chapter. This was supposed to be an exciting fresh start for us. We'd been married for a year, and things were going perfectly. He got a great job offer, and I was more than happy to support him. I didn't think twice when he suggested we move. After all, I wanted to be there for him, to support his dreams and help build our future together. The first few weeks were fine. I mean, how could they not be? I had my husband, we were living in a beautiful new place, and everything seemed promising. I loved the idea of creating a home together. But as the days passed, I began to feel something was missing. There were moments when I felt this unsettling loneliness creeping in. We were in a completely new place, far away from family and friends, and it quickly became apparent that I had no one here except for him. It was a tough feeling, one I couldn't easily shake off. To make matters more complicated, my husband's ex, let's call her baby mama, and their daughter, E, moved in with us too. I understood why. She was his daughter, and of course he wanted her close, especially with the new job. The situation wasn't ideal, but I was willing to make it work. However, the moment they arrived, it felt like something shifted in the air. There was a constant tension, a sense of unease. Baby mama was 38, and E was 9 years old. Their presence in our home felt complicated. For context, my husband and his ex had a pretty unusual history. He was just 17 when E was born, and his ex, the woman he had a child with, had been his high school teacher. It wasn't exactly the most conventional love story. I knew him from high school, and we got close when I helped him take care of E. He was a great dad, even at that age. Seeing him take responsibility for his daughter made me fall in love with him. Over time, our bond grew, and eventually, we got married. But things began to change when we moved. At first, I kept myself busy with the idea of settling in. I started making an effort to bond with E. We baked cookies together, helped her with homework, and watched movies. We had these small moments, nothing too big, just little things to pass the time. But I had no idea that these innocent moments would become the center of a storm. I could sense the underlying tension between me and baby mama, though I tried my best to keep things civil for the sake of my husband, but soon my world would be shaken in a way I never saw coming. It was one quiet evening, just a few months after the move, that everything changed. My husband and I were sitting on the couch, talking about our plans for the week, when he received a phone call. It was from his ex. Her voice was raised, and I could hear the sharpness in her tone. Concerned about the argument, my husband stepped into another room, not wanting to disturb me. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, they were parents, and their conversations about E weren't unusual. But what happened next left me stunned. When my husband stepped into the other room to take that phone call, I didn't think much of it. I knew he had to stay in touch with his ex to coordinate about their daughter, E, but I couldn't have known that this simple phone call would spark something much darker. At first, I tried to focus on the small things around the house, maybe organize a few things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I felt like an outsider in my own home, with E and her mom living under our roof. It was as if I wasn't allowed to fully exist in the life I thought I was building. When my husband came back into the living room, his demeanor was different. He didn't sit down beside me like he usually did. Instead, he stood there, a faraway look in his eyes, and his jaw was tight. I tried to ask if everything was okay, but he didn't immediately respond. A chill ran down my spine as I noticed how much he was avoiding looking at me, and then he spoke. "He told me something," he said quietly, almost like he was trying to convince himself. I raised an eyebrow, confused. She said you've been hitting her." The words hit me like a slap to the face. I froze, my heart sinking into my stomach. "What?" I asked, my voice shaking. That's not true. I would never lay a hand on her. You know that. But his face was unreadable. There was no sign of the man I loved. The man who had been my partner for years. Instead, he looked conflicted, as though he didn't know what to believe anymore. He stepped back a little, almost as if he was afraid of me. My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. How could he believe that? How could he even entertain the idea? I tried to explain over and over again, pleading with him to believe me. I swear, I never hurt E. We've baked cookies, watched movies together. I've always treated her like family. But it was no use. The words didn't seem to reach him. He looked at me, eyes hardening, and said, "I need time to think." Then, without another word, he grabbed his car keys and left. I couldn't believe it. My husband, the man I trusted more than anyone, just walked out of the door without a second glance. My head spun, trying to make sense of it all. I sat there in silence, unable to move. Was this really happening? Was this some terrible misunderstanding? The hours felt like days, as I sat in that empty house, the silence pressing down on me. I tried calling him repeatedly, but it was no use. He didn't pick up. The more I called, the more distant he became, until finally he blocked me. I was left alone, completely isolated, in a place where I didn't know anyone. I had no family here, no friends. All I had was him, and now he was gone. I didn't know what to do. My hands were trembling, and I couldn't stop the tears from falling. It felt like my entire world had just crumbled beneath me. How could he not trust me? How could he believe his daughter's lie over everything we had built together? The anger, the confusion, and the heartbreak mixed together in a wave of despair. But worse than anything, I felt a deep, aching fear. I was alone in a state that wasn't mine, with no support and no idea what would happen next. Days passed after my husband left, and each one felt like a never-ending loop of anguish and confusion. My phone remained silent, with no word from him. The silence in the house was deafening, and I found myself wandering around aimlessly, unsure of what to do. I spent countless nights lying awake, my mind racing with questions. How could he leave me like this? How could he not see the truth? Every time I thought I understood what was happening, the situation grew more complicated. Then, just as the emptiness of our home began to settle in, I realized I had no choice. I couldn't just wait for him to come back. I couldn't live in this constant state of uncertainty. I had to move forward, even if it meant doing it without him. The days stretched into weeks, and I tried my best to stay busy, to distract myself from the heartbreak. But the loneliness never went away. The worst part was that, in those moments of silence, I kept thinking about his daughter, E. Despite everything that had happened, I knew she was a part of his life, and I didn't want her to suffer because of this mess. It wasn't her fault. I kept thinking about how confused she must be too, torn between her parents, caught in the middle of something she didn't fully understand. But the thought of her lying about me, claiming I'd hurt her, well, that was something I couldn't shake off. That lie had torn everything apart. And then, one night, the call came. I had been sitting on the couch, nursing my frustration and hurt, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me it was important. With trembling hands, I answered it. To my shock, it was him, my husband. His voice was low, tired, almost apologetic. "I know you've been trying to reach me," he said. "I'm sorry. I needed time to think." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what to say. His words were soft, but the tension between us still hung thick in the air. "Please," he continued, his voice strained. "I want to fix this. I didn't want to believe E, but I didn't know who to trust. I thought maybe you were hiding something from me." My throat tightened as I heard those words. He didn't trust me. He didn't believe me. I thought about how I had begged him to listen, how I had tried to explain over and over again. How could he have doubted me so easily? How could he have let a lie from his daughter tear us apart? "You should have trusted me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I would never hurt her, and you should have known that." There was a long silence before he spoke again, his voice breaking. I know, I've messed up, but I need you to understand, I was just trying to protect my daughter." Tears welled up in my eyes as I felt the weight of his words. In that moment, I understood that this wasn't just about me. It was about him, too. He had been so wrapped up in trying to protect his daughter that he couldn't see how his actions were destroying everything. But even with that understanding, it didn't change the fact that he had left me, that he had chosen to walk away without even hearing my side. I sat in silence, the phone pressed to my ear, my emotions swirling. I wanted to believe him, to forgive him. But a part of me knew that it wasn't that simple. Could I trust him again after everything that had happened? "Please," he whispered again, this time with more urgency. "I want to see our son. Please, just let me see him." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him he didn't deserve to see our baby after everything. But instead, all I could do was hold back my tears and say the words I never thought I'd have to say. "I'll think about it." And with that, the call ended. I sat there, feeling more confused and broken than ever before. The man I had trusted more than anyone had just shattered everything, and now he wanted to come back. But could I let him? Could I really forgive him after what he had done? The questions swirled in my mind, and I didn't have the answers. The days after that phone call were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, of being left alone in the dark while he went off to deal with his own confusion. But I also knew that I couldn't keep living in this state of limbo. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about our son. I had to think about what was best for him. Could I really let my husband back into our lives after everything that had happened? As I struggled with these thoughts, the pain of childbirth and the exhaustion from those first few weeks of motherhood began to settle in. My beautiful baby boy was born, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace and joy. He was everything I'd ever dreamed of, and I couldn't help but marvel at him every moment. Holding him in my arms gave me strength. It was a love that was pure and unconditional. And in that moment, it was all I could focus on. But even in the midst of that overwhelming love, my mind couldn't escape the reality of what had happened. My husband had abandoned me, and although he'd tried to apologize, I wasn't sure if I could forgive him. Could I even trust him again after what he had done? The way he walked out without any explanation, the way he believed a lie over my word, it was too much. And now, here he was, asking to see our son. I kept replaying that conversation in my head, wondering if I had made the right choice when I told him I'd think about it. But as the days passed, the weight of his request began to grow heavier. I had to face the truth. I couldn't keep running from this. The question was, what did I want? What did my son deserve? Was it fair to him to withhold his father? Or was it better for me to protect him from the man who had left me so easily? It was a Friday afternoon when I received the message from him. It was short, to the point. "I'm sorry, I want to be there for our son. Please let me see him." The words didn't bring the relief I thought they would. In fact, they only made everything feel worse. I felt like I was being torn in two, caught between the love I still had for him and the fear of being hurt again. How could I open myself up to him, knowing that he had walked away so easily when things got tough? Was this just another attempt to make himself feel better, or was he truly sorry? It wasn't long before I decided I couldn't keep avoiding him. I knew I needed to have a conversation with him, to get the answers I needed. But even then, I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure if I could face him. Part of me wanted to scream at him for everything he had done, to tell him how much he had hurt me. The other part of me missed him desperately. I wanted to believe that we could still fix things, that we could somehow find a way back to what we once had. After a sleepless night, I finally made up my mind. I couldn't keep pretending like this situation didn't affect me. My son deserved to have both of his parents in his life, but that didn't mean I had to ignore the pain that I'd been through. It was time to make a decision, one that would affect the rest of our lives. I couldn't do it alone anymore. The next morning, I called him. My heart was racing in my chest as I dialed his number. Would he answer? Would he understand the gravity of everything? When the phone rang, I held my breath. Then he picked up. The familiar sound of his voice on the other end sent a wave of emotion rushing through me. But I steeled myself. I had to be strong for my son. "I think it's time we talk," I said, my voice trembling, "but we need to figure out what happens next." And that was when I realized that whatever happened, I wasn't the same person I had been when this all started. I had changed. And whether he could accept that change was something I wasn't sure of yet. But I had to know. What would he do now? When I called him that morning, my heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was expecting, maybe some kind of apology, maybe a confession of regret. But as the phone rang, I realized that nothing could prepare me for what was about to come. When he answered, his voice was soft, almost hesitant. I could hear the exhaustion in his words, as if he too had been carrying this weight around for far too long. "I'm glad you called," he said, his voice full of regret. "I know I've messed up. I want to make things right, but I need you to understand. I've been struggling with everything. I was just trying to protect E." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting his words sink in. I understood that he was conflicted. I had always known how deeply he loved his daughter, how protective he was of her. But his actions, the way he believed the lie she had told, left me feeling like I didn't even know him anymore. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal of the trust we had built together. And that trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. "I know you were trying to protect her," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "but you never even gave me a chance to explain. You just walked away, and I was left alone." There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment, I wondered if he had hung up, but then I heard him sigh. "I'm sorry, I should have listened, I should have trusted you, and I didn't. I was scared of losing her, but now I realize I've hurt you and I can't take that back." His words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the apology that got to me, it was the rawness in his voice, the realization that he knew how badly he had messed up. But as much as I wanted to forgive him, there was still that nagging voice in the back of my mind. Could I really trust him again? Could we go back to the way things were before everything fell apart? "I don't know if I can do this," I said, my voice cracking. "I don't know if I can just forget how you left me, how you believed a lie over everything we had." There was another pause, and this time it felt longer. I wasn't sure if he knew what to say. What could he possibly say? What could he do to make up for what had happened? "I understand," he replied quietly, "and I'm not asking for you to forget, but I want to be there for you and our son. I want to make things right, even if it takes time." I let out a shaky breath, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. He wanted to fix things. He wanted to be there for our son. But could I let him back into our lives after everything he had put me through? I stood up from the couch, pacing around the room as I thought about it. Our son deserved a father. I wanted him to have that, even if it meant facing the man who had hurt me. But there was a part of me, a part that still loved him, that wanted to believe we could rebuild what we had lost. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my voice softer now. "But we can't just pretend everything is okay. We need to take it slow." There was a long pause, and then he spoke, his voice filled with hope. "I'll do whatever it takes. I just want the chance to prove myself to you." As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with uncertainty. I wasn't sure what would happen next. Could we rebuild our relationship, or had too much been lost? All I knew was that I had to be careful. I couldn't just throw myself back into something that had torn me apart. It would take time. Time to rebuild trust, time to heal. But maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward. For our son, for our family. I wasn't ready to forgive him completely yet, but I was willing to see if we could make it. It was a small step, but it was a step forward, and that was all I could do.